You're scrolling through your phone at 2 in the morning, eyes burning, mind racing, but your body feels like it's carrying the weight of the entire world. Sound familiar? That bone-deep exhaustion that sleep can't fix. That heaviness in your chest that makes even breathing feel like work. You're not just tired from a long day or a sleepless night. You're soul tired, heart tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your very being and whispers lies about who you are and whether anything will ever get better. But what if I told you that in this very moment, while you're sitting there feeling like you can't take another step, there's a voice calling out to you? Not the harsh voice of your inner critic, not the demanding voice of the world around you, but a gentle whisper that says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." See, here's what most people don't understand about true rest. They think it's about getting 8 hours of sleep or taking a vacation or finally finishing that never-ending to-do list. But Jesus isn't talking about that kind of rest. He's talking about something deeper, something that touches the very core of who you are. He's talking about soul rest. The kind of rest that doesn't depend on your circumstances changing, but transforms how you carry those circumstances. And right now, as you're watching this, I want you to know something. You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to put on that brave face or act like you have it all together. Jesus sees past all of that anyway. He sees the real you, the tired you, the overwhelmed you, the you that's been running on empty for way too long. And he's not disappointed. He's not frustrated with you for being human. He's extending his hand and saying, "Let me carry this with you." Now I know what some of you might be thinking, but you don't know my situation. You don't know what I'm dealing with. You don't know how deep this goes. And you're right, I don't know your specific story, but Jesus does. He knows every sleepless night, every anxious thought, every moment you felt like giving up. He knows because he's been there too. He knows what it's like to be so overwhelmed that you sweat drops of blood. He knows what it's like to carry burdens that feel too heavy for human shoulders. He knows what it's like to feel abandoned and alone. But here's the beautiful thing about Jesus. He didn't just experience those things and move on. He experienced them and then conquered them, so that when you're in your darkest valley, when you're at your most exhausted point, you're not walking alone. His gentle whisper isn't coming from someone who's never been where you are. It's coming from someone who went deeper into the darkness than you'll ever have to go, and he came out victorious on the other side. Think about that for a moment. The creator of the universe, the one who spoke stars into existence and painted sunsets with his fingertips, that same God looks at you in your tiredness and doesn't see a burden. He doesn't see someone who's too much trouble or too broken to fix. He sees someone worth dying for, someone worth pursuing, someone worth whispering to in the middle of the night when the world feels too heavy to carry. And that whisper, that gentle voice that cuts through all the noise and chaos of life, it's not just offering you a band-aid solution. It's not just saying, "Hey, cheer up, things could be worse." No, Jesus' whisper is offering you something revolutionary. It's offering you a complete exchange, your weariness for his strength, your anxiety for his peace, your confusion for his clarity, your loneliness for his presence. But here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't some cosmic transaction where you have to earn your way to rest. You don't have to get your life together first. You don't have to stop struggling or fix all your problems or become the perfect Christian before Jesus will whisper healing into your soul. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He's calling out to you specifically because you're tired, specifically because you're struggling, specifically because you need what only he can give. Remember when Jesus walked this earth? Who did he spend his time with? Was it the people who had it all figured out? Was it the religious leaders who looked perfect on the outside? No. He spent his time with the broken, the weary, the outcasts, the ones everyone else had given up on. He had dinner with tax collectors and talked to women at wells in the middle of the day. He touched lepers and called fishermen to follow him. He saw potential where others saw problems, and he sees the same thing when he looks at you. You see, your tiredness isn't a disqualification from God's love. It's actually an invitation into it. It's like Jesus is saying, finally you've reached the end of yourself. Finally you're ready to let me be strong where you are weak. Finally, you're ready to discover what I've been wanting to give you all along. And what is it that He wants to give you? Well, that's where this gets really good. Because Jesus isn't just offering you a momentary break or a quick fix. He's offering you a complete transformation of how you approach life itself. He's offering you a new way of being in the world that doesn't depend on everything going right, or everyone understanding you, or all your problems disappearing overnight. When Jesus whispers to your weary soul, He's inviting you into a relationship that changes everything. Not because your circumstances necessarily change, though sometimes they do, but because you change. The way you see yourself changes. The way you understand your worth changes. The way you carry the weight of life changes. Think about it like this. Imagine you've been carrying a 100-pound backpack for miles and miles. Your shoulders are aching, your back is screaming, and every step feels impossible. Then someone comes alongside you, someone stronger than you, and says, "Hey, let me carry that for you." But instead of taking the whole backpack away, which might make you feel helpless or useless, they slip their arms through the straps too. Suddenly, that 100-pound load feels like nothing, because you're sharing it with someone who has the strength to carry it all. That's what Jesus' gentle whisper is offering you. Not necessarily the removal of every challenge or difficulty in your life, but the sharing of that load with someone who has infinite strength and infinite love for you. And when you're sharing that load with Jesus, when His whisper becomes the soundtrack of your soul, everything changes. Your perspective changes. Instead of seeing problems, you start seeing opportunities for God to show up. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the unknown, you start feeling curious about what God might do next. Instead of being crushed by the weight of expectations, yours and others, you start finding freedom in knowing that your worth isn't based on your performance, but on His love for you. Your priorities change too. The things that used to keep you up at night start losing their power over you. Not because they're not important, but because you start seeing them in the context of eternity, in the context of a God who works all things together for good for those who love Him. You start asking different questions. Instead of, how am I going to handle this? You start asking, how is God going to use this? Instead of, why is this happening to me? You start asking, what is God wanting to teach me through this? And here's something beautiful that happens when you really start listening to Jesus' gentle whisper. You start to realize that He's not just speaking to you in the big dramatic moments of life. He's not just showing up when you're in crisis mode or when you've hit rock bottom. He's been whispering to you all along, in the ordinary moments, in the quiet spaces, in the everyday rhythms of life. Maybe it was that sunset that took your breath away last week, and for just a moment, you felt a peace you couldn't explain. Maybe it was that song on the radio that seemed to speak directly to your heart, right when you needed to hear it. Maybe it was that unexpected phone call from a friend, or that stranger who smiled at you in the grocery store checkout line. Maybe it was that verse you stumbled across while scrolling through your phone, or that dream that felt more real than reality itself. You see, Jesus' whisper isn't always audible. Sometimes it's a feeling, a knowing, a sudden shift in your spirit that reminds you that you're not alone. Sometimes it's a door that opens when you thought you were trapped. Sometimes it's strength that shows up when you were certain you had nothing left to give. Sometimes it's hope that rises up in your chest when everything around you looks hopeless. But here's what I want you to understand about this whisper, this gentle voice that's calling out to your tired soul. It's not passive. It's not just a nice feeling or a comforting thought. Jesus' whisper is active and alive and powerful. It has the ability to literally transform the cellular structure of your being. It can rewire your thought patterns, reshape your emotional responses, and redirect the entire trajectory of your life. When Jesus whispers healing into your soul, He's not just putting a bandage over your wounds. He's getting to the root of what's causing the tiredness in the first place. Maybe it's shame from your past that you've been carrying like a backpack full of rocks. Maybe it's fear about your future that's been stealing your sleep and your peace. Maybe it's comparison to others that's been draining your joy and making you feel like you're never enough. Maybe it's perfectionism that's been driving you to exhaustion as you try to earn love and acceptance through your performance. Whatever it is that's making you soul-tired, Jesus sees it, He knows it. And His whisper has the power to heal it from the inside out. Not through your effort or your willpower or your ability to think positive thoughts, but through His love, His grace, His finished work on the cross that declared once and for all that you are enough, you are loved, you are chosen, you are His. And as that truth begins to sink deeper and deeper into your soul, as that whisper becomes louder than all the other voices competing for your attention, something miraculous begins to happen. You start to find rest, not just for your body, but for your mind, your emotions, your spirit. You start to discover what it means to be fully known and fully loved at the same time. You start to experience the kind of peace that doesn't make sense to the world around you, the kind of joy that doesn't depend on your circumstances, the kind of hope that can't be shaken by temporary setbacks or disappointments. But let me tell you what happens next, because this is where it gets really beautiful. As Jesus' gentle whisper begins to heal your soul, as that divine rest starts flowing through your weary bones, you don't just become a different person overnight. You become the person you were always meant to be, the person God dreamed about when He first thought of you before the foundation of the world. You know that feeling when you finally come home after a long, exhausting trip, when you walk through your front door and just exhale because you're finally in a place where you can be completely yourself. That's what happens when Jesus' whisper reaches the deepest parts of your tired soul. You finally come home to who you really are, underneath all the masks, all the pretending, all the striving. And here's something most people miss about this healing process. It doesn't happen all at once, like flipping a light switch. It's more like watching the sunrise. At first, there's just this tiny hint of light on the horizon. You might not even notice it if you're not paying attention. But gradually, slowly, that light begins to spread across the sky, pushing back the darkness, warming everything it touches. That's how Jesus' whisper works in your life. Maybe the first thing you notice is that you sleep a little better one night. Maybe it's that overwhelming situation at work doesn't seem quite as impossible as it did yesterday. Maybe it's that conversation with your spouse doesn't spiral into an argument like it usually does. Small things, gentle shifts, whispers of change that gradually transform everything. But as those whispers accumulate, as that healing light continues to spread through your soul, you start experiencing something that might feel foreign at first. You start experiencing what the Bible calls shalom. It's often translated as peace, but it's so much more than just the absence of conflict or chaos. Shalom is wholeness, completeness, everything being exactly as it should be. It's your soul finally finding its proper place in the universe. When Jesus whispers shalom into your tired heart, you stop needing everyone around you to validate your worth. You stop needing every situation to work out perfectly for you to be okay. You stop needing to control every outcome because you trust the one who's orchestrating the symphony of your life. And in that trust, in that surrender to his gentle whisper, you find a rest that goes deeper than sleep, a peace that surpasses understanding, a strength that doesn't come from your own reserves. Now, I want to address something that might be stirring in your heart right now. Maybe you're thinking, this sounds too good to be true. I've been disappointed before. I've prayed before and felt like God wasn't listening. I've hoped before and been let down. How do I know this time will be different? And that's a fair question. In fact, it's a brave question because it means you're being honest about your pain instead of just pretending everything is fine. Jesus loves that kind of honesty. He's not threatened by your doubts or your questions or your past disappointments. He's actually drawn to them because he knows that's where real healing begins. You see, Jesus doesn't whisper to perfect people because perfect people don't exist. He whispers to real people with real struggles and real questions and real wounds. He whispers to people who've been hurt by life, by other people, sometimes even by churches or religious experiences that were supposed to represent him, but fell short. He whispers to people who've built walls around their hearts because trusting feels too risky. But here's what makes Jesus different from every other voice you've ever listened to. His whisper isn't dependent on your faith being perfect, or your understanding being complete, or your past being spotless. His whisper is dependent on his character, his love, his faithfulness, and those things never change, never waver, never fail. When Jesus whispers to your soul, he's not asking you to have it all figured out first. He's not asking you to clean yourself up or get your act together or prove that you're worthy of his attention. He's simply asking you to listen, to be still for just a moment and let his voice be louder than all the other voices in your head. And what does that voice say? It says things like, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made." It says, "I have loved you with an everlasting love." It says, "Nothing can separate you from my love." And it says, "I have plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future." It says, "Cast all your anxiety on me because I care for you." It says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." But maybe the most healing whisper of all is simply this: you can stop performing now. You can stop trying to earn your way into my love. You can stop carrying burdens that were never meant for your shoulders. You can stop pretending to be stronger than you are. You can just be human, beautifully and messily human, and I will love you completely. Can you imagine what your life would look like if you really believed that? If you woke up every morning knowing, not just thinking, but knowing deep in your bones, that you are completely loved exactly as you are. If you faced every challenge, every setback, every uncertain moment, knowing that you're not facing it alone. If you went to sleep every night with the whisper of divine love being the last thing you heard, instead of the voice of worry or regret or fear. This isn't wishful thinking or positive psychology or some kind of spiritual bypass that ignores real problems. This is the reality that Jesus died to make possible for you. This is the rest that he purchased with his own blood, the healing that he made available through his resurrection, the whisper that he sends through his Spirit to every tired soul who's willing to listen. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to wait until you feel worthy or ready or prepared. You don't have to wait until you understand all the theology or have all your questions answered or get your life completely organized. You can hear his whisper right now in this moment, exactly where you are. Maybe you're lying in bed at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, mind racing with worry about tomorrow. His whisper is there. Maybe you're sitting in your car in a parking lot, crying because you just can't take another disappointment. His whisper is there. Maybe you're at your kitchen table, looking at bills you can't pay, or medical results you're afraid to face, or relationship problems you don't know how to solve. His whisper is there. His whisper isn't limited by time or space or circumstances. It's not deterred by your doubt or your anger or your confusion. It cuts through all of that because it's not coming from this world. It's coming from the realm of perfect love, perfect peace, perfect understanding, and that realm is available to you right now. But here's what I've learned about hearing Jesus' whisper in the midst of soul tiredness. Sometimes you have to get quiet enough to actually listen. Not physically quiet, though that can help, but internally quiet. You have to turn down the volume on all the other voices competing for your attention. The voice of anxiety about the future, the voice of regret about the past, the voice of comparison to others, the voice of perfectionism that says you're never doing enough. Those voices are loud and demanding and urgent. They scream for your attention because they know that if you hear Jesus' whisper, if you really hear it and believe it, Their power over you is broken. They know that his voice of love is stronger than their voice of fear. His voice of acceptance is stronger than their voice of shame. His voice of hope is stronger than their voice of despair. So they fight dirty. They convince you that you don't have time to listen for God's voice. They tell you that you need to figure everything out on your own. They whisper lies, like God helps those who help themselves, and you can't bother God with your small problems, and if God really cared, your life wouldn't be such a mess. But every single one of those voices is lying to you. The truth is, God is not too busy for you. Your problems are not too small for his attention. Your life being messy doesn't mean he doesn't care. It means you live in a broken world that he's in the process of healing, starting with your own heart. And when you finally quiet those lying voices long enough to hear his whisper, when you create space in your soul for his healing words to take root, everything begins to shift. Not because your circumstances necessarily change overnight, but because your relationship with those circumstances changes. You stop being a victim of your tiredness and start being someone who's learning to rest in the midst of the storm. You know what's amazing about Jesus' whisper? It's not just comforting, it's transforming. It doesn't just make you feel better for a moment, it actually changes you at the cellular level. Scientists are now discovering what believers have known for centuries, that prayer, meditation, and spiritual practices literally rewire your brain, reduce stress hormones, boost your immune system, and increase your capacity for joy and peace. But even more than the physical benefits, Jesus' whisper transforms your identity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who's barely surviving, you start seeing yourself as someone who's deeply loved. Instead of seeing yourself as a problem to be solved, you start seeing yourself as a masterpiece being restored. Instead of seeing yourself as alone in your struggles, you start seeing yourself as accompanied by the Creator of the universe, who's intimately involved in every detail of your life. And as that new identity takes root, as Jesus' whisper becomes the soundtrack of your soul, you start living differently. You start making decisions from a place of rest instead of panic. You start responding to challenges from a place of confidence instead of fear. You start treating yourself and others with the same gentleness that Jesus shows to you. This transformation doesn't happen because you're trying harder or doing more spiritual activities or following some formula for getting God's attention. It happens because you're finally allowing yourself to receive what's always been available to you. You're finally opening your hands to catch the rain that's been falling on you all along. And here's something beautiful about this process. As Jesus' whisper begins to heal the deep tiredness in your soul, you start to notice that you have something to give to others. Not from your own depleted reserves, but from the overflow of what you're receiving from him. You become like a well that's been filled from an underground spring, and suddenly there's fresh water flowing out to everyone around you. Maybe it's patience with your children when they're being difficult, and instead of snapping at them, you find yourself speaking with the same gentleness Jesus speaks to you. Maybe it's compassion for that coworker who always seems to create drama, and instead of avoiding them, you find yourself seeing their pain underneath their behavior. Maybe it's forgiveness for someone who hurt you deeply, not because they deserve it, but because you're experiencing what it feels like to be forgiven completely. You see, when Jesus whispers healing into your tired soul, he's not just healing you for your own sake. He's healing you so that you can become a conduit of that same healing to a world that's desperately tired and hungry for authentic love. He's whispering to you so that you can learn to whisper his words of life to others who need to hear them. But let me tell you something that might surprise you about this healing process. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes Jesus' whisper reveals things in your heart that you'd rather keep hidden. Sometimes his love shines light into corners of your soul where you've been storing bitterness, unforgiveness, pride, or fear. And that can feel overwhelming at first. It's like when you've been in a dark room for a long time and someone suddenly turns on a bright light. Your eyes hurt, you want to cover them, you might even feel angry at the person who turned on the light. But your eyes aren't hurting because the light is bad for you. They're hurting because they need time to adjust to seeing clearly again. That's what happens when Jesus' whisper starts exposing the places in your heart that need healing. It might feel uncomfortable at first. You might want to run back to the familiar darkness of handling everything on your own. But if you'll stay with the process, if you'll let his gentle voice guide you through the discomfort, you'll discover that seeing clearly is worth the temporary pain of adjustment. And here's what I love about Jesus' approach to this healing process. He never forces it. He never demands that you open up areas of your heart before you're ready. He's infinitely patient, infinitely gentle, infinitely kind. He whispers, he doesn't shout. He invites, he doesn't demand. He waits, he doesn't rush. Think about how different this is from every other voice in your life. Your boss demands immediate results. Your family members want you to change overnight. Your own inner critic screams at you to get your act together. Social media bombards you with images of people who seem to have it all figured out. The world around you is constantly pushing, pulling, demanding, expecting. But Jesus whispers. He speaks to you like you're precious, like you're worth his time, like your healing matters more to him than your productivity. He's more interested in your heart than your performance, more concerned with your wholeness than your usefulness, more focused on your becoming than your doing. And in that whisper, in that gentle approach, there's actually incredible power. It's the power of perfect love that casts out fear. It's the power of grace that transforms from the inside out. It's the power of acceptance that creates the safety you need to actually change. You know what happens when you feel completely safe with someone. When you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they love you no matter what. You relax, you stop pretending, you let your guard down, you become willing to be vulnerable, to admit where you're struggling, to ask for help. That's exactly what Jesus' whisper creates in your soul. It creates a safe space where you can finally exhale, where you can stop performing and start healing, where you can be honest about how tired you really are without fear of rejection or judgment or abandonment. And in that safety, in that unconditional acceptance, the most amazing thing happens. You start to heal not because you have to, but because you want to. Not because someone is forcing you to change, but because you're experiencing what it feels like to be truly loved, and that love naturally transforms you from the inside out. I've seen this happen over and over again in people's lives. Someone who's been carrying shame for decades suddenly finds themselves able to forgive themselves because they've heard Jesus whisper, "There is no condemnation for those who are in me." Someone who's been paralyzed by anxiety about the future suddenly finds peace because they've heard him whisper, "I know the plans I have for you." Someone who's been exhausted from trying to earn love through their achievements suddenly finds rest because they've heard him whisper, "You are my beloved, in whom I am well pleased." These aren't just nice religious phrases or empty platitudes. These are life-transforming truths that have the power to literally rewire your neural pathways, reshape your emotional responses, and redirect the entire trajectory of your life. When you really hear them, when you let them sink down into the deepest places of your soul, everything changes. But here's something I want you to understand about receiving this healing whisper from Jesus. It's not a one-time event. It's not like you hear it once and then you're fixed forever. It's more like a daily conversation, an ongoing relationship, a continuous flow of life and love and healing that you can tap into whenever you need it. Think of it like breathing. You don't take one breath and then you're good for life. You take breath after breath after breath, constantly receiving the oxygen your body needs to function. That's how it is with Jesus' whisper to your soul. You need to hear it again and again, to let it fill you up again and again, to remind yourself again and again of who you are and whose you are. Some days you'll hear his whisper clearly, and you'll feel strong and peaceful and ready to face whatever comes your way. The days, the noise of life will be so loud that you'll struggle to hear his voice, and you'll feel that familiar tiredness creeping back in. That's normal. That's human. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong or that God has stopped speaking to you. It just means you need to come back to that quiet place, that listening posture, that open-hearted receptivity to his voice. You need to remind yourself that his love for you isn't based on how well you're doing at hearing him. His whisper isn't dependent on your spiritual performance or your emotional state or your ability to focus perfectly. His whisper is constant, like a radio station that's always broadcasting. Sometimes you tune in clearly, sometimes there's static, sometimes you forget to turn on the radio at all. But the signal is always there, always available, always ready to fill your soul with exactly what you need to hear. And what you need to hear might be different today than it was yesterday. Sometimes you need to hear, "Be still and know that I am God." Sometimes you need to hear, "Do not be afraid, I am with you." Sometimes you need to hear, "My grace is sufficient for you." Sometimes you need to hear, "Cast all your cares on me because I care for you." Jesus knows exactly what your tired soul needs to hear in each moment, and his whisper is perfectly calibrated to meet you right where you are. He doesn't give generic advice or one-size-fits-all solutions. He speaks specifically to your situation, your struggle, your heart. Maybe today you need to hear that you're not behind in life, that you're exactly where you need to be for this moment in your journey. Maybe you need to hear that your feelings are valid, that it's okay to not be okay, that struggling doesn't make you a failure. Maybe you need to hear that you don't have to have all the answers, that it's okay to take things one day at a time, one moment at a time. Or maybe you need to hear something that challenges you gently, that calls you forward into growth and healing. Maybe you need to hear that you're stronger than you think you are, that you have what it takes to face what's ahead of you. Maybe you need to hear that it's time to forgive someone who hurt you, not for their sake, but for your own freedom. Maybe you need to hear that it's time to let go of something you've been holding on to that's actually weighing you down. Whatever it is that your soul needs to hear, Jesus knows, and his whisper will meet you there, in that exact place of need, with exactly the right words spoken in exactly the right tone, with exactly the right timing. But here's something crucial about learning to hear Jesus' whisper of healing. You have to create space for it in your life. I don't mean you have to become a monk or spend hours in prayer every day, though if that's what works for you, that's beautiful. I mean, you have to intentionally pause long enough to listen. In our culture of constant noise, constant stimulation, constant busyness, we've almost forgotten how to be still. We check our phones the moment we wake up and the last thing before we go to sleep. We fill every quiet moment with podcasts or music or scrolling through social media. We've become afraid of silence, afraid of being alone with our thoughts, afraid of what we might discover if we actually slow down long enough to listen to our own hearts. But Jesus' whisper often comes in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the noise, in the stillness that we so often try to avoid. It comes when you're walking outside and you notice the way the light filters through the trees. It comes when you're sitting in your car before you go into work and you take 3 deep breaths instead of immediately checking your phone. It comes when you're lying in bed at night and instead of rehearsing all your worries, you whisper a simple prayer, asking him to speak to your heart. These don't have to be long, elaborate spiritual practices. They can be tiny moments scattered throughout your day when you remember that you're not alone, when you acknowledge that there's someone who loves you and wants to speak life into your tired soul. Maybe it's pausing before you eat a meal and thanking him not just for the food, but for his provision in your life. Maybe it's looking in the mirror in the morning and instead of criticizing what you see, whispering, "Good morning, beloved," to yourself, because that's how he sees you. Maybe it's taking 5 minutes before you start your workday to ask him to help you see the people around you through his eyes of love. These small moments of connection, these tiny pauses to listen for his whisper, they add up. They create a rhythm in your life where you're regularly receiving from him instead of constantly depleting yourself. They build your capacity to hear his voice, even in the midst of chaos and stress and overwhelming circumstances. And as you practice this, as you get better at recognizing his whisper, you'll start to notice that he's been speaking to you in ways you never realized. That song that came on the radio right when you needed encouragement, that was him. That text from a friend who had no idea you were struggling, that was him. That moment when you felt a sudden peace in the middle of a difficult situation, that was him. Jesus is constantly whispering love and healing and hope into your life, but often we miss it because we're not expecting it or we're too distracted to notice. When you start actively listening for his voice, when you start expecting to hear from him, you'll be amazed at how creative he is in the ways he speaks to you. He might speak through a verse you read, through a conversation with a friend, through something you see in nature, through a dream, through a sudden insight or idea, through a feeling of peace that comes over you, through circumstances that line up in ways that could only be him. His whisper isn't limited to one method or one format. He speaks in whatever way you're most likely to hear and receive. But here's what I want you to know as you're learning to tune in to Jesus' whisper of healing. You don't have to be perfect at it. You don't have to hear him clearly every time you listen. You don't have to understand everything he's saying or have profound spiritual experiences every day. Sometimes his whisper will be as simple as a feeling that you're loved. Sometimes it will be as gentle as a reminder that you don't have to carry everything alone. Sometimes it will be as quiet as a sense that everything is going to be okay, even if you can't see how right now. Don't despise these small whispers, these gentle touches on your soul. They're not less valuable than dramatic spiritual experiences or audible voices or miraculous interventions. In fact, they might be more valuable because they're available to you every single day, in every single situation, regardless of how you're feeling or what you're facing. Jesus' whisper of healing is like a gentle stream that flows constantly, not like a rushing waterfall that only appears occasionally. And your tired soul needs that constant gentle flow more than it needs occasional dramatic moments. You need the daily reminder that you're loved, the regular reassurance that you're not alone, the consistent invitation to lay down your burdens and rest in his care. As you begin to receive this healing whisper more regularly, as it becomes part of the rhythm of your life, you'll notice that your tiredness starts to transform. Not necessarily because your circumstances become easier, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of those circumstances alone. You'll start to experience what the Bible calls the peace that surpasses understanding. It's a peace that doesn't make logical sense based on what's happening around you, but it's real and it's powerful and it sustains you in ways that nothing else can. You'll start to discover what it means to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being. It's not a superhuman strength that makes you invincible, but it's a divine strength that shows up right when you need it, that carries you through situations you never thought you could handle. You'll start to understand what Jesus meant when he said, "His yoke is easy and his burden is light." Life doesn't become burden-free, but those burdens become shared with someone who has infinite capacity to carry them. And when you're sharing the load with Jesus, even heavy things become manageable. This is what happens when Jesus' gentle whisper becomes the dominant voice in your life. You start to live from a place of rest instead of a place of striving. You start to approach each day knowing that your worth isn't determined by how much you accomplish, or how well you perform, or how perfectly you handle every situation that comes your way. Instead, you wake up already beloved. You face challenges already accepted. You encounter difficulties already equipped with everything you need. Not because you've somehow earned these things, but because Jesus' whisper has reminded you of what was always true about you, what has always been available to you. And here's something that might surprise you about this transformation. As your soul finds rest in Jesus' whisper, as that deep tiredness begins to lift, you don't become passive or complacent. You don't lose your drive or your passion or your desire to make a difference in the world. Actually, the opposite happens. When you're no longer exhausted from trying to prove your worth, you have energy to actually live out your purpose. When you're no longer depleted from carrying burdens that were never meant for your shoulders, you have strength to carry the things that are truly yours to carry. When you're no longer running on empty, desperately trying to fill yourself up through achievements or relationships or external validation, you become a person who has something real to offer others. Think about it like this. Have you ever tried to give someone directions when you were completely lost yourself? Have you ever tried to comfort someone else when you were falling apart inside? Have you ever tried to encourage someone when you were drowning in discouragement? It's exhausting, isn't it? And it's not very effective either, but when you know where you are, when you're operating from a place of stability and peace, giving directions becomes natural. When you've experienced comfort in your own pain, comforting others flows easily. When you've received encouragement in your darkest moments, encouraging others becomes as natural as breathing. That's what Jesus' whisper does in your life. It establishes you in truth, grounds you in love, anchors you in hope. And from that stable foundation, you become someone who can actually help stabilize others. Not because you have all the answers, or because your life is perfect, but because you know where to find answers, and you know the one who brings perfection out of brokenness. I've watched this happen in people's lives over and over again. Someone who's been paralyzed by their own anxiety suddenly finds themselves able to speak peace into someone else's panic attack. Someone who struggled with feeling worthless suddenly finds themselves able to see the incredible value in people that everyone else has overlooked. Someone who's been crushed by their own mistakes suddenly finds themselves able to offer grace to others who are drowning in shame. This isn't because they've become perfect or because they no longer struggle. It's because Jesus' whisper has taught them how to receive healing. And people who know how to receive healing naturally become conduits of healing for others. But let me tell you something important about this process. Jesus' whisper doesn't heal you so that you can become a spiritual superhero who never struggles again. It heals you so that you can become fully human, beautifully human, authentically human in a world that desperately needs to see what that looks like. See, one of the lies that keeps us tired and exhausted is the belief that we have to be more than human to be valuable. We think we have to be perfect parents, flawless employees, ideal friends, spiritual giants who never doubt or struggle or make mistakes. We exhaust ourselves trying to be superhuman instead of learning to be fully human. But Jesus' whisper reminds you that he didn't come to earth as a superhuman. He came as a human. He got tired, he got hungry, he got frustrated, he wept, he felt abandoned. He experienced every emotion and struggle that you experience, and in his humanity, he showed us what it looks like to live as a human being who's connected to divine love. That's what his whisper is calling you into. Not perfection, but connection. Not superhuman strength, but divine partnership. Not the elimination of all struggle, but the transformation of how you move through struggle. When Jesus whispers healing into your tired soul, he's not trying to make you into someone you're not. He's trying to restore you to who you've always been, underneath all the weariness, underneath all the performing, underneath all the fear and shame and exhaustion that have been covering up your true self. You know that feeling when you take off shoes that have been too tight all day? That moment of relief when the pressure is finally released and your feet can be their natural shape again. That's what Jesus' whisper does for your soul. It releases the pressure of trying to be someone you're not, and it allows your true self to emerge, and your true self, the person God created you to be, is not tired all the time. Your true self is not overwhelmed by life. Your true self is not constantly anxious or discouraged or defeated. Your true self is connected to an infinite source of love and peace and strength and joy. Now, I'm not saying that your true self never experiences difficult emotions or challenging circumstances. I'm saying that your true self knows how to experience those things without being destroyed by them, how to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, how to face uncertainty without being paralyzed by fear. Your true self knows how to grieve without despairing, how to be angry without being consumed by bitterness, how to be disappointed without losing hope, how to be human without being crushed by the weight of humanity. This is what Jesus' whisper reveals to you and restores in you. This is the healing that goes deeper than just feeling better for a moment. This is the transformation that changes not just how you feel, but who you are and how you move through the world. And as this deeper healing takes place, as Jesus' whisper continues to restore your true self, you start to notice changes that surprise you. Maybe you find yourself laughing more easily, finding joy in simple things that you used to be too tired to notice. Maybe you discover that you're more patient with difficult people because you're not constantly on edge yourself. Maybe you realize that you're sleeping better, not because your circumstances have changed, but because you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders anymore. Maybe you start to see beauty again in places where you used to only see problems. Maybe you find yourself grateful for things you used to take for granted. Maybe you discover that you actually enjoy your own company, that you don't need constant noise or distraction to feel okay about being alone with yourself. These might seem like small things, but they're actually indicators of profound healing happening in your soul. They're signs that Jesus' whisper is doing exactly what it promises to do, giving rest to the weary, healing to the broken-hearted, hope to the discouraged. But here's something beautiful about this healing process that I want you to understand. It's not just about you. Yes, Jesus loves you individually and specifically and intimately. Yes, he's deeply concerned with your personal healing and wholeness and joy. But his whisper to your tired soul is also part of something much bigger. You see, we live in a world that's collectively exhausted. We live in a culture that's running on empty, that's forgotten how to rest, that's lost touch with what it means to be truly human. Everyone around you is carrying burdens they were never meant to carry, trying to find their worth in things that can never satisfy, searching for peace in places where peace cannot be found. When Jesus whispers healing into your soul, when you learn to receive rest and peace and strength from him, you become a living demonstration of what's possible. You become proof that there's another way to live, another source of strength, another foundation for identity and worth and hope. People will notice. They might not be able to put their finger on exactly what's different about you, but they'll sense something. They'll see someone who's not constantly stressed out, who doesn't need to control every outcome, who can face uncertainty with a strange kind of peace. They'll encounter someone who treats them with kindness even when they're difficult, who sees their potential even when they can't see it themselves, who offers hope even in hopeless situations. And in their encounter with you, they're actually encountering an echo of Jesus' whisper. They're getting a taste of what it might be like to have their own tired souls healed. They're seeing a preview of the rest and peace and wholeness that Jesus wants to give them too. This is how Jesus' whisper spreads from one tired soul to another. Not through preaching or arguing or trying to convince people, but through the simple witness of a life that's been transformed by divine love. Through the gentle evidence of someone who's learned to live from rest instead of exhaustion, from love instead of fear, from hope instead of despair. You become like a tuning fork that's been struck by the perfect pitch of Jesus' love. And when you come near other souls that are out of tune, tired, overwhelmed, struggling, they start to resonate with that same frequency. They start to remember what they were created for, what they were designed to experience, who they really are underneath all their weariness. But let me tell you something that's crucial to understand. about being this kind of witness, this kind of echo of Jesus's whisper. You don't have to be perfect at it. You don't have to have every area of your life completely healed before you can be a source of healing for others. You don't have to never struggle or never have bad days or never feel tired again. In fact, some of the most powerful witnesses to Jesus's healing whisper are people who are still in the process of being healed themselves. People who are honest about their struggles, but who can also testify to the ways Jesus is meeting them in those struggles. People who don't pretend to have it all figured out, but who can point others to the one who does. There's something incredibly beautiful about someone who can say, I don't know how this is all going to work out, but I know the one who does, and he's been faithful to me so far. There's something deeply compelling about someone who can admit, I still get tired sometimes, but I've learned where to go for rest, and it's made all the difference. This kind of authenticity, this willingness to be real about both your struggles and your healing, creates space for others to be real too. It gives them permission to admit that they're tired, that they're struggling, that they need help. And in that honesty, in that vulnerability, Jesus's whisper can reach them too. Because here's the thing about Jesus's whisper, it's not just for people who have their lives together. It's not just for people who are naturally optimistic or spiritually mature or emotionally stable. It's specifically for people who are tired, who are struggling, who are at the end of themselves. Jesus said, Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, not some of you, not just the ones who deserve it or the ones who have earned it or the ones who can handle it properly. All of you, every single person who's carrying more than they can bear, who's running on empty, who's forgotten what it feels like to really rest. That invitation is as open today as it was when Jesus first spoke those words. His whisper of healing is available to every tired soul who's willing to listen, regardless of their background, their mistakes, their current circumstances, their level of faith or understanding or spiritual maturity. Maybe you're listening to this and thinking, but you don't understand how far I've fallen, how many mistakes I've made, how badly I've messed up my life. Maybe you're thinking, I've been running from God for so long, surely He's given up on me by now. Maybe you're thinking, I've tried religion before and it didn't work, so why would this be any different? Let me tell you what Jesus's whisper says to every single one of those thoughts. It says, I've been waiting for you. It says, there's nothing you could do that would make me love you less. It says, I'm not interested in your performance, I'm interested in your heart. It says, come as you are, not as you think you should be. His whisper doesn't wait for you to clean up your act or get your life together or become worthy of His attention. His whisper comes to you right where you are, right now, in the middle of your mess, in the depths of your tiredness, in the midst of your confusion and pain and struggle. And it says the same thing to you that it said to the woman caught in adultery, to the tax collector who couldn't even lift his eyes to heaven, to the thief dying on the cross next to Jesus. It says, you are loved, you are forgiven, you are accepted, you are mine. That whisper has the power to change everything, not because you've changed, but because love changes everything. Perfect love, unconditional love, everlasting love that doesn't depend on your performance or your worthiness or your ability to get it right. When that kind of love whispers to your tired soul, when you really hear it and begin to believe it, it creates a transformation that goes deeper than any self-improvement program or positive thinking technique or willpower strategy ever could. It changes you from the inside out because it changes how you see yourself, how you understand your worth, how you relate to the world around you. You stop trying to earn love and start learning to receive it. You stop trying to prove your worth and start resting in the worth that's already been declared over you. You stop exhausting yourself trying to be good enough and start discovering what it feels like to already be beloved. And in that discovery, in that shift from earning to receiving, from performing to resting, from striving to trusting, your soul finds the healing it's been desperately searching for. Not because your circumstances become perfect, but because you're no longer facing those circumstances alone. Not because life becomes easy, but because you're sharing the load with someone who has infinite strength and infinite love for you. This is the healing that Jesus' whisper offers to every tired soul. This is the rest that goes deeper than sleep, the peace that surpasses understanding, the strength that comes not from your own reserves, but from an endless source of divine love. And the most beautiful thing about this healing whisper is that it never stops. It's not a one-time offer or a limited-time opportunity. It's not dependent on your mood or your circumstances or your spiritual performance. It's as constant as your heartbeat, as reliable as the sunrise, as faithful as the God who speaks it over you every single day. Right now, in this very moment, regardless of where you are or what you're facing or how tired you feel, Jesus is whispering healing to your soul. He's calling your name with love. He's speaking peace over your anxiety. He's declaring hope over your despair. He's pouring strength into your weakness. Can you hear it? Can you feel it? Can you sense, even in the smallest way, that you're not alone in your tiredness? That there's someone who sees you and loves you and wants to give you rest? That whisper is real. That love is true. That invitation to come and find rest for your soul is extended to you right now, exactly as you are, with all your struggles and questions and weariness. You don't have to figure out how to hear it perfectly or understand it completely or respond to it properly. You just have to be willing to listen, to be still for just a moment, and let his voice of love be louder than all the other voices competing for your attention. Because when you do, when you create even the smallest space for Jesus' whisper to reach your tired soul, everything begins to change. Not all at once, not dramatically necessarily, but gently, gradually, the way dawn slowly pushes back the darkness and fills the world with light. And in that light, in that gentle transformation, you'll discover what your soul has been longing for all along. You'll find the rest that doesn't depend on your circumstances, the peace that doesn't require everything to be perfect, the strength that flows not from your own efforts, but from the infinite love of the one who whispers healing over your weary heart. That whisper is calling to you right now. Can you hear it? Will you listen? Will you let Jesus' gentle voice heal your tired soul? The invitation is open. The love is real. The healing is available. All you have to do is say yes to the whisper that's been calling your name all along. You know what's remarkable about Jesus' whisper? It doesn't just speak to the obvious wounds, the surface-level tiredness that everyone can see. His voice reaches into the hidden places, the secret chambers of your heart, where you've stored hurts that you've never told anyone about. Those middle-of-the-night thoughts that make you wonder if you're fundamentally flawed. Those moments when you look in the mirror and hear a voice that says, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough. You might as well stop trying." Maybe it's the wound from childhood, when someone who was supposed to protect you instead hurt you, and you've been carrying that betrayal like a stone in your chest ever since. Maybe it's the failure that happened years ago, but you still replay it in your mind like a broken record, convinced that one mistake defines your entire worth. Maybe it's the dream that died, the relationship that ended, the opportunity that slipped through your fingers, and you've been punishing yourself for it ever since. Jesus sees all of it. Every hidden wound, every secret shame, every place where you've been bleeding internally while smiling on the outside. And his whisper doesn't avoid these painful places or pretend they don't matter. Instead, he speaks directly into them with words of healing that you never thought you'd hear. To the part of you that's convinced you're damaged goods, he whispers, "I make all things new." To the part of you that believes you've messed up too badly to be forgiven, he whispers, "As far as the east is from the west, so far have I removed your transgressions from you." To the part of you that thinks you're too much trouble, too needy, too broken to be loved, he whispers, "I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness, I have drawn you." But here's what makes these whispers so powerful. They're not just nice words or spiritual platitudes meant to make you feel better temporarily. They're declarations of truth that have the power to literally rewire your brain, to create new neural pathways that override the old patterns of shame and self-condemnation that have been running your life. When Jesus whispers healing into those deep, hidden wounds, he's not just offering you a band-aid. He's offering you surgery performed by the great physician himself, surgery that doesn't require anesthesia because his presence is so gentle, so loving, so safe that you can remain fully conscious while he removes the infected parts of your heart and replaces them with healthy tissue. I've seen this happen in ways that can only be described as miraculous. A woman who had been sexually abused as a child and hadn't been able to trust anyone for 30 years, suddenly found herself able to receive a hug without flinching. A man who had been abandoned by his father and spent his whole life trying to prove he was worthy of love, suddenly realized he could stop performing and just be himself. A teenager who had been bullied so severely that she wanted to end her life suddenly discovered that she had value that no one could take away from her. These transformations didn't happen because these people tried harder or thought more positive thoughts or followed some self-help formula. They happened because Jesus' whisper reached into the deepest, most wounded parts of their souls and spoke truth that was more powerful than the lies they had been believing about themselves. You see, the enemy of your soul is a liar, and he's been whispering his poison into your ear for so long that you might not even recognize his voice anymore. It sounds like your own thoughts, your own inner dialogue, your own reasonable conclusions about who you are and what you deserve. But every single word of it is a lie designed to keep you tired, keep you defeated, keep you isolated from the love that could heal you. He whispers things like, "You're too much trouble. If people really knew you, they wouldn't love you. You've made too many mistakes to be forgiven. God has better things to do than worry about your problems. You should be stronger than this by now. Everyone else has it figured out except you. You're the only one who struggles this much." But Jesus' whisper cuts through every single one of those lies like a sword of truth. Where the enemy says you're worthless, Jesus says you're precious. Where the enemy says you're alone, Jesus says he'll never leave you or forsake you. Where the enemy says you're too broken to be fixed, Jesus says he specializes in binding up the brokenhearted. And here's something beautiful about the way Jesus' truth works in your life. You don't have to argue with the lies or fight against them or try to convince yourself they're not true. You just have to listen to his whisper of truth, and his truth automatically displaces the lies. Light doesn't have to fight against darkness. Light just shows up, and darkness has no choice but to flee. When Jesus whispers, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made," that truth begins to crowd out the lie that says you're a mistake. When he whispers, "I have plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you," that truth begins to overpower the fear that says your future is hopeless. When he whispers, "Nothing can separate you from my love," that truth begins to silence the voice that says you're too far gone to be saved. But let me tell you something about receiving this healing truth. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable at first, not because the truth is harsh, but because you've been living with lies for so long that truth feels foreign. It's like when you've been sitting in a dark room for hours and someone turns on a light. Your eyes hurt, not because light is bad for you, but because they need time to adjust to seeing clearly again. When Jesus whispers truth into your wounded places, part of you might want to reject it. Part of you might say, "That can't be true about me. You don't know what I've done. You don't know how I've failed. You don't know the thoughts I think or the things I struggle with." But that resistance isn't coming from wisdom or realism. It's coming from the lies you've believed for so long that they feel like truth. It's coming from a wounded part of yourself that has learned to find identity in brokenness, that has become so familiar with shame that wholeness feels threatening. This is why Jesus' whisper is so gentle, so patient, so persistent. He knows that healing deep wounds takes time. He knows that learning to receive love when you've been rejected takes practice. He knows that trusting again when you've been betrayed requires courage, so he doesn't rush the process or demand that you heal on his timeline. He simply keeps whispering truth, keeps speaking love, keeps offering healing until you're ready to receive it. And as you begin to receive it, as his whisper of truth begins to take root in the soil of your soul, something miraculous starts to happen. You begin to see yourself the way he sees you. Not as the sum of your mistakes, or the victim of your circumstances, or the product of other people's opinions about you. You begin to see yourself as his beloved, his chosen, his treasured possession. This shift in identity, this movement from seeing yourself through the lens of your wounds to seeing yourself through the lens of his love, changes everything. It changes how you walk into a room, how you handle criticism, how you respond to rejection, how you face uncertainty, how you treat yourself in your own mind. When you know, really know deep in your bones that you are beloved by the Creator of the universe, it becomes much harder for other people's opinions to devastate you. When you understand that your worth was established before you ever did anything right or wrong, it becomes easier to learn from your mistakes without being destroyed by them. When you grasp that you are chosen not because of what you bring to the table, but because of who chose you, it becomes possible to rest in your identity instead of constantly trying to prove it. But here's something I want you to understand about this identity transformation. It's not about becoming arrogant or thinking you're better than other people. It's actually the opposite. When you truly understand how loved you are, how much grace you've received, how undeserved and yet complete your acceptance is, it creates humility, not pride. You begin to look at other people and realize that they need the same grace you've received. You begin to see their wounds and struggles, not as reasons to judge them, but as opportunities to extend the same compassion that has been extended to you. You begin to understand that everyone is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying burdens you can't see, longing for the same healing whisper that has transformed your own soul. This is how Jesus' whisper creates not just personal healing, but relational healing. As his truth heals the wounded places in your heart, you become someone who can offer healing to others. Not because you have all the answers or because you're perfect, but because you know where to find healing and you've experienced its power in your own life. Maybe you become the person who notices when someone else is struggling and offers a kind word instead of judgment. Maybe you become the one who listens without trying to fix, who sits with people in their pain without trying to rush them through it. Maybe you become someone who can speak truth in love, who can offer hope without minimizing someone's real struggles. You know what's beautiful about this? You don't have to wait until you're completely healed to start being a healing presence for others. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone is simply the testimony that healing is possible, that Jesus' whisper is real, that there is hope even in the darkest valleys. There's something uniquely powerful about someone who can say, I know what it's like to feel the way you're feeling, and I want you to know that you're not alone. There's something deeply comforting about meeting someone who bears the scars of their own battles, but who can also testify to the faithfulness of God in the midst of those battles. This is how Jesus' whisper spreads from one heart to another, from one wounded soul to another. Not through preaching or arguing or trying to convince people, but through the simple witness of a life that's being transformed by divine love. Through the gentle evidence of someone who's learning to live from wholeness instead of brokenness, from truth instead of lies, from love instead of fear. But let me address something that might be stirring in your heart right now. Maybe you're thinking, this all sounds wonderful, but how do I actually hear this whisper? How do I know if it's really Jesus speaking to me or just my own thoughts or wishful thinking? These are such important questions, and I'm so glad you're asking them because they show that you're taking this seriously, that you really want to experience this healing for yourself. Let me share with you some practical ways to tune your heart to hear Jesus' whisper more clearly. First, remember that his whisper will always align with his character as revealed in Scripture. Jesus' voice will never contradict what God has already said about himself, about you, about love, about grace, about healing. If you're hearing something that sounds harsh, condemning, hopeless, or fearful, that's not Jesus' whisper. His voice brings conviction when necessary, but it's always wrapped in love and always points toward redemption. Second, Jesus' whisper brings peace, even when it challenges you. His voice might call you to difficult obedience or painful growth, but underneath that call, you'll sense his love, his support, his promise to be with you every step of the way. The enemy's voice brings anxiety, panic, shame, and isolation. Jesus' voice brings clarity, hope, courage, and the assurance that you're not walking alone. Third, Jesus' whisper often comes in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the noise of life. It's hard to hear a whisper when you're surrounded by shouting. This doesn't mean you have to become a hermit or spend hours in silent meditation every day. Though, if that works for you, that's beautiful. It means creating small pockets of silence in your day when you can tune your heart to listen. Maybe it's the first 5 minutes after you wake up, before you check your phone or start your mental to-do list. Maybe it's while you're driving to work, turning off the radio, and just being present with your thoughts and your heart. Maybe it's while you're taking a shower, letting the warm water wash over you, while you open your soul to receive whatever Jesus wants to speak to you. These moments don't have to be long or elaborate or perfectly spiritual. They just have to be intentional. You're setting aside time to listen because you believe that Jesus has something to say to you, because you're expecting to hear from him. And here's something beautiful about creating these listening spaces in your life. Even if you don't hear a clear word or feel a dramatic sense of God's presence every time, the very act of making space to listen is changing you. It's training your heart to be receptive to his voice. It's developing your spiritual ears. It's creating a rhythm in your life where you're regularly positioning yourself to receive from him instead of constantly giving out. Fourth, Jesus often speaks through his written word in ways that feel personal and timely. You might read a verse you've read 100 times before, but suddenly it jumps off the page and speaks directly to your current situation. You might open your Bible randomly and find exactly what your heart needed to hear. You might be listening to a sermon or reading a book and feel like the author is speaking directly to your struggles. This isn't coincidence. This is Jesus using various means to whisper into your life. He's not limited to one method of communication. He can speak through Scripture, through other people, through circumstances, through nature, through dreams, through sudden insights or ideas, through that still small voice in your spirit that just knows something is true. Fifth, pay attention to the fruit in your life. Jesus said you'll know a tree by its fruit. When you're regularly hearing Jesus' whisper, when you're receiving his healing truth, it will produce good fruit in your life. You'll notice more peace, more patience, more love, more joy, more hope. You'll find yourself responding to difficult situations with more wisdom and grace. You'll discover that you're less reactive, less defensive, less controlled by your emotions. This doesn't mean you'll become perfect or never struggle again. It means you'll have a different relationship with your struggles. You'll face them with more confidence because you know you're not facing them alone. You'll process them with more hope because you know that God can work all things together for good. Now, let me address another question that might be in your heart. What if I've been hurt by church or by Christians? What if my experience with religion has been negative? How do I know this is different? Oh, friend, I'm so sorry if you've been wounded in places that were supposed to be safe, by people who were supposed to represent Jesus' love, but instead caused you pain. This breaks God's heart even more than it breaks yours. The people who hurt you were flawed human beings, just like you and me, and they failed to reflect his true character. But here's what I want you to know. Jesus' whisper is not the same as religion. Jesus' whisper is not dependent on churches or pastors or religious institutions or other Christians behaving perfectly. Jesus' whisper is a direct, personal, intimate communication between him and your soul that no one else can interfere with or contaminate. You can hear his whisper even if you never set foot in a church again. You can experience his healing even if you've been disappointed by every religious person you've ever met. You can receive his love even if you've been rejected by people who claim to follow him. Because Jesus' whisper comes directly from him to you. It's not filtered through human interpretation or institutional doctrine or denominational theology. It's the pure, undiluted voice of love himself, speaking healing into your wounded heart. And honestly, sometimes the people who hear his whisper most clearly are the ones who've been hurt by religion, because they're not trying to make his voice fit into their preconceived notions about what God should sound like. They're not filtering his words through religious expectations or theological frameworks. They're just desperate enough to listen with their whole heart, and that desperation becomes the very thing that opens them up to receive his healing. Jesus has been calling to you through all the noise, through all the disappointment, through all the religious confusion and human failure. His voice has been constant even when everything else has been inconsistent. His love has been pursuing you even when you've been running from anything that looks like faith. And right now, in this moment, his whisper is cutting through all of that and speaking directly to your heart. Not the heart that's been hardened by disappointment, but the heart underneath all that, the heart that still hopes, still longs, still believes that maybe, just maybe, there's someone who could love you completely and heal you thoroughly. That heart is right. That hope is not foolish. That longing is actually God-given because he placed it there to draw you to himself. You were created for this connection, designed for this relationship, wired to hear his voice and find your rest in his love. But here's something else I want you to understand about Jesus' whisper. It's not just about your individual healing, though that's incredibly important to him. His whisper is also an invitation into something bigger than yourself, something that connects you to a larger story of redemption and restoration that's been unfolding since the beginning of time. When Jesus whispers healing into your tired soul, he's not just making your life better, he's restoring you to your original purpose, your intended design, your role in his grand plan to heal a broken world. He's calling you back to who you were meant to be before weariness and wounds and the weight of the world changed you into someone you barely recognize. You were created to be a bearer of his image, a reflection of his love, a conduit of his healing presence in the world. You were designed to live in perfect harmony with him, to draw your strength from his strength, to find your identity in his delight in you. You were meant to be a person who walks through life with confidence not in yourself, but in him, who faces challenges with peace not because you can handle everything, but because you know he can. When Jesus whispers to your weary heart, he's calling you back to this original design. He's reminding you that your tiredness is not your natural state, that your brokenness is not your permanent condition, that your struggles are not your final destination. He's inviting you to remember who you were before the world told you who you should be. He's calling you to reclaim the dreams that got buried under disappointment, the gifts that got hidden under insecurity, the calling that got silenced under criticism and comparison. This is why his whisper is so healing. It's not just addressing your symptoms, it's addressing the root cause of your soul tiredness, which is disconnection from your true self, your true purpose, your true source of life and strength and joy. When you begin to hear his whisper clearly, when you start to believe what he says about you, when you allow his truth to reshape your understanding of who you are, you don't just feel better. You become more yourself than you've ever been. You start living from the core of who you were created to be, instead of from the wounds and fears and misconceptions that have been driving your life. And as you become more yourself, more the person God dreamed about when he first thought of you, you begin to fulfill your original purpose in ways you never imagined possible. You start bringing healing to places that are broken, hope to situations that seem hopeless, love to people who feel unlovable. Not because you've become perfect, but because you've become connected. Connected to the source of all healing, all hope, all love. Connected to Jesus, whose whisper continues to speak life into your soul and through your life into the souls of others who desperately need to hear that same voice of healing. This is the ripple effect of Jesus' whisper in your life. It starts with your own healing, but it doesn't end there. It flows out through your relationships, your work, your community, your world. Every person you encounter is touched by the healing you've received, even if they don't know it, even if you don't realize it. When you're living from a place of rest instead of exhaustion, people notice. When you're responding to stress with peace instead of panic, it affects everyone around you. When you're treating yourself with kindness instead of harsh criticism, you naturally start treating others with that same kindness. You become a living demonstration of what Jesus' whisper can do in a human life. You become proof that healing is possible, that hope is real, that love is stronger than any wound or disappointment or failure. And in a world that's collectively exhausted, collectively wounded, collectively longing for something real and healing and hopeful, your life becomes a beacon that points others toward the same source of healing that transformed you. This is why Jesus' whisper to your tired soul matters so much. It's not just about you feeling better, though he deeply cares about that. It's about you becoming who you were always meant to be, so that through your life, others can discover who they were meant to be too. His whisper to you is actually his whisper to a world that desperately needs to hear his voice of love, his promise of healing, his invitation to come and find rest for weary souls. Can you hear it now? Can you sense, even in the smallest way, that his whisper is not just for you but through you? That the healing he wants to bring to your tired heart is part of his plan to heal the tiredness of the world. You are not just a recipient of his love. You are a conduit of his love. You are not just someone who needs healing. You are someone through whom healing flows. You are not just a voice that needs to hear his whisper. You are a voice through which his whisper reaches others, who are just as tired, just as wounded, just as desperate for hope as you have been. This is the beautiful, overwhelming, life-changing reality of what happens when Jesus whispers healing into your soul. You discover that you were never meant to carry your burdens alone, and you were never meant to keep his healing to yourself. You were created to be part of his great work of restoration, his ongoing mission to seek and save the lost, to bind up the brokenhearted, to comfort those who mourn, to give beauty for ashes and joy for mourning and praise for the spirit of heaviness. And it all starts with his gentle whisper to your tired soul, calling you home to rest, calling you back to yourself, calling you forward into the abundant life he always intended for you to live. That whisper is calling to you right now. It's been calling to you all along, through every season of tiredness, through every moment of despair, through every night when sleep wouldn't come, and every day when hope felt impossible to find. He's been whispering your name with love, whispering healing over your wounds, whispering truth over the lies you've believed about yourself, whispering hope into your heart even when you couldn't hear it or didn't know how to receive it. But now you know. Now you understand what that gentle voice has been offering you all along. Now you can choose to listen, to receive, to let his whisper of healing transform not just how you feel, but who you are and how you live in this world. The invitation is still open, the love is still real, the healing is still available, and your tired soul is still precious to him, still worth his attention, still deserving of his rest. Will you listen to his whisper? Will you let him heal your weary heart? Will you allow his gentle voice to become the soundtrack of your soul? The answer is yes. But maybe you're hesitating because you've tried to find rest before, and it didn't work. Maybe you've looked for healing in relationships that disappointed you, in achievements that left you empty, in substances or habits that promised relief, but delivered only more exhaustion. Maybe you've even tried prayer before and felt like your words just bounced off the ceiling. Here's what I want you to understand about those attempts at finding rest. They weren't failures. They were your soul crying out for what it was designed to receive. Every restless night, every anxious thought, every moment when you felt like you couldn't breathe under the weight of it all, those were signals from your deepest self that you were created for something more than survival mode. Your soul knows the difference between temporary relief and true healing. It knows the difference between numbing the pain and actually addressing what's causing it. It knows the difference between surface-level solutions and the deep, transformative rest that only comes from connection with your Creator. And that's why nothing else has worked. Not because you're broken beyond repair, not because you're too far gone, not because you don't deserve healing, but because your soul was specifically designed to find its rest in Jesus, and it will never be satisfied with substitutes, no matter how appealing they might seem. Think about it like this. If you tried to charge your phone with the wrong charger, it wouldn't work. Not because there's anything wrong with your phone, but because it was designed to receive power from a specific source. Your soul is the same way. It was created to be recharged, restored, and renewed by Jesus' love. And when you try to fill that need with anything else, you end up more drained than when you started. But when you connect to the right source, when you allow Jesus' whisper to reach the deepest places of your heart, something miraculous happens. It's like that moment when your phone finally connects to the charger after being dead for hours. Suddenly there's life flowing back into something that seemed completely depleted. That's what Jesus' whisper does for your tired soul. It doesn't just give you a temporary boost or a momentary feeling of peace. It connects you to an unlimited source of life and strength and hope that never runs out, never fails, never disappoints. But here's something crucial about this connection. It's not something you achieve through effort, or earn through good behavior, or maintain through perfect spiritual performance. It's something you receive through surrender, through simply saying yes to the love that's already reaching toward you. Jesus isn't waiting for you to get your act together before he'll whisper healing into your life. He's not requiring you to understand everything about faith or theology or doctrine before he'll offer you rest. He's not demanding that you fix yourself first or prove that you're worthy of his attention. He's simply asking you to be honest about your tiredness, to admit that you need help, to acknowledge that you can't carry the weight of your life alone anymore. And in that honesty, in that vulnerability, in that moment of surrender, his whisper breaks through all the noise and reaches your heart with exactly what you need to hear. Maybe what you need to hear right now is that you're allowed to be tired. In a culture that glorifies busyness and celebrates exhaustion as a badge of honor, maybe you need permission to admit that you're not okay, that you're running on empty, that you need rest not just for your body, but for your soul. Maybe you need to hear that your worth isn't determined by your productivity, that your value doesn't decrease when your energy does, that you're still precious and loved and significant even when you can barely function. Maybe you need to hear that it's okay to disappoint people sometimes, that you can't meet everyone's expectations and you were never meant to try, that saying no to others so you can say yes to your own healing isn't selfish. It's necessary. Maybe you need to hear that your struggles don't make you weak, that asking for help doesn't make you a burden, that needing rest doesn't make you lazy or inadequate or less spiritual than people who seem to have endless energy. Or maybe you need to hear something that challenges you gently, that calls you forward into growth. Maybe you need to hear that your tiredness isn't just something that's happening to you. It's also something you can do something about. Not through willpower or positive thinking or trying harder, but through learning to receive the healing that Jesus wants to give you. Maybe you need to hear that some of your exhaustion is coming from trying to control things that were never meant to be in your hands, from carrying responsibilities that belong to God, from fighting battles that He wants to fight for you. Maybe you need to hear that you have permission to let go, to release your grip on outcomes you can't control, to trust that God can handle the things you've been losing sleep over, to believe that His plans for your life are better than your own. Whatever it is that your heart needs to hear, Jesus knows, and His whisper is perfectly calibrated to meet you exactly where you are with exactly what you need. Not generic advice or one-size-fits-all solutions, but personalized truth, spoken with infinite love, directly to your individual situation. But here's something I've learned about receiving Jesus' whisper in the midst of deep tiredness. Sometimes you have to get still enough to hear it, not just physically still, though that can help, but emotionally and mentally still. You have to create space in your inner world for His voice to be heard above all the other voices competing for your attention. Those other voices are loud and demanding. The voice of your to-do list screaming that you don't have time to rest. The voice of your fears insisting that you can't trust anyone else to handle your responsibilities. The voice of your pride whispering that needing help makes you weak. The voice of your past telling you that you don't deserve healing anyway. But Jesus' voice is different. It doesn't shout or demand or compete. It whispers. It invites. It waits patiently for you to create the inner space where it can be heard. And when you do, when you quiet all those other voices long enough to listen for His, you'll discover that He's been speaking to you all along. He's been whispering your name in the sunrise that takes your breath away, in the unexpected kindness of a stranger, in the song that comes on the radio right when you need to hear it, in the hug from a friend who somehow knows you're struggling, in the peace that washes over you for no apparent reason in the middle of a difficult day. His whispers are everywhere, woven into the fabric of your daily life, speaking healing and hope and love into every moment if you have eyes to see and ears to hear. But often we miss them because we're looking for something more dramatic, something that fits our expectations of how God should speak. We expect thunder when He sends gentle rain. We expect earthquakes when He offers a soft breeze. We expect burning bushes when He whispers through still, small voices that require us to lean in close to hear. But that's the beauty of Jesus' whisper. It's intimate, personal, designed specifically for your heart. It doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It doesn't need to be dramatic to be life-changing. It just needs to be received, believed, and allowed to do its healing work in your soul. And as you begin to recognize His whisper, as you start to tune your heart to hear His voice more clearly, you'll discover that He's not just speaking comfort to you, He's also speaking direction, guidance, wisdom for the decisions you're facing and the challenges you're walking through. His whisper might tell you to take that job you've been hesitant about, or to leave the one that's been draining your soul. It might encourage you to have that difficult conversation you've been avoiding, or to set boundaries you've been afraid to establish. It might call you to forgive someone who hurt you, or to forgive yourself for mistakes you've been carrying like stones in your backpack. Sometimes His whisper will confirm what you already know in your heart, but have been afraid to act on. Sometimes it will surprise you with a perspective you never considered. Sometimes it will simply reassure you that you're on the right path, even when everything around you feels uncertain. But whether His whisper brings comfort or challenge, direction or reassurance, it will always be wrapped in love. It will always point you toward wholeness, toward healing, toward the abundant life He came to give you. It will never condemn you or shame you or leave you feeling hopeless about your situation. Even when Jesus' whisper convicts you of something that needs to change in your life, it does so with the gentleness of a loving parent guiding a child, not the harshness of a judge pronouncing sentence. Even when it calls you to difficult obedience or painful growth, it comes with the promise that you won't walk that path alone. This is how you can distinguish Jesus' whisper from all the other voices in your head. His voice brings peace, even when it challenges you. It brings hope, even when it reveals areas that need healing. It brings love, even when it calls you to change. The enemy's voice, on the other hand, brings anxiety, shame, hopelessness, and isolation. It tells you that you're too far gone to be helped, that your situation is hopeless, that God has given up on you, that you might as well stop trying. But Jesus' whisper tells a completely different story. It says that no one is too far gone for his love to reach them. It says that no situation is too complicated for his wisdom to navigate. It says that no wound is too deep for his healing to touch. It says that no burden is too heavy for his strength to carry. And when you begin to believe his whisper instead of the enemy's lies, when you choose to listen to his voice of love instead of the voice of condemnation, everything in your life begins to shift. Not necessarily your circumstances, though sometimes those change too, but your relationship with your circumstances. You stop being a victim of your tiredness and start being someone who's learning to rest in the midst of demanding seasons. You stop being overwhelmed by your challenges and start seeing them as opportunities for God to show his faithfulness. You stop being crushed by the weight of expectations and start finding freedom in knowing that your worth isn't based on your performance. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's more like the slow, steady process of dawn pushing back the darkness. At first, you might only notice tiny changes. You sleep a little better one night. You respond to a stressful situation with slightly more patience than usual. You catch yourself choosing hope instead of despair in a moment when despair would have been your automatic response. But as those small changes accumulate, as Jesus' whisper continues to reshape your heart and mind, you begin to experience what the Bible calls being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Your thought patterns change. Your emotional responses shift. Your default settings get reprogrammed from anxiety to peace, from fear to faith, from exhaustion to rest. And the most beautiful part is that this transformation isn't dependent on your circumstances improving. You can experience deep soul rest in the middle of a challenging season. You can have peace that surpasses understanding while walking through difficult valleys. You can find joy and strength and hope even when nothing around you has changed. Because Jesus' whisper doesn't just change how you feel about your situation. It changes how you see your situation. It gives you his perspective on what you're walking through, his understanding of how he's going to use even the difficult things for your good and his glory. When you see your struggles through his eyes, when you understand them in the context of his love and his plans for your life, they don't disappear, but they lose their power to defeat you. They become opportunities for growth instead of evidence of failure. They become places where you discover his strength instead of reminders of your weakness. This is what it means to find rest for your soul. Not the absence of challenges or difficulties, but the presence of Jesus in the midst of them. Not a life without problems, but a life with someone who's bigger than any problem you'll ever face. Not perfection, but the peace that comes from knowing you're perfectly loved, regardless of how imperfect your circumstances might be. And as this rest settles into your soul, as Jesus' whisper becomes the soundtrack of your inner life, you begin to discover gifts and callings and purposes that have been buried under your exhaustion. You start to remember dreams that got lost in the chaos of survival. You begin to see possibilities that were invisible when you were running on empty. Maybe you remember that you used to love to create, to write or paint or make music, but you gave it up because there wasn't time or because someone told you it wasn't practical. Maybe you recall a passion for helping others, for making a difference in your community, but you've been too overwhelmed with your own problems to think about anyone else's. Maybe you start to sense a calling to something new, something you never considered before, but that stirs something deep in your heart when you think about it. Maybe it's going back to school, starting a business, volunteering for a cause you care about, or simply being more present and intentional in the relationships you already have. When your soul finds rest in Jesus, when his whisper heals the deep tiredness that's been sapping your energy and creativity, you don't just feel better. You become more yourself. You rediscover parts of who you are that got lost in the struggle just to make it through each day. And as you become more yourself, as you start living from your true identity, as God's beloved child, rather than from your wounds and fears and exhaustion, you naturally begin to fulfill the purposes he created you for. Not because you're trying harder or doing more, but because you're finally connected to the source of life and strength that makes authentic living possible. This is the ripple effect of Jesus' whisper in your life. It starts with your own healing, your own rest, your own restoration, but it doesn't end there. As you become more whole, more at peace, more connected to who you really are, that wholeness begins to overflow into every area of your life and every relationship you have. Your family notices that you're more patient, more present, more able to enjoy the moment instead of always worrying about what's next. Your friends see that you're more stable, more encouraging, more able to listen without trying to fix everything. Your co-workers observe that you're more calm under pressure, more creative in problem solving, more generous with your time and attention. You become a different kind of presence in the world. Not perfect, not without struggles, but grounded in something deeper than circumstances, anchored in a love that doesn't depend on performance, sustained by a rest that goes beyond anything sleep could provide. And in a world full of tired, overwhelmed, anxious people, your life becomes a testimony to the reality of Jesus' healing whisper. You become living proof that there's another way to live, another source of strength, another foundation for peace and hope and joy. People might not be able to put their finger on exactly what's different about you, but they'll sense something. They'll be drawn to the peace they see in you, curious about the hope you carry, attracted to the rest they observe in your spirit. And in those moments of curiosity, in those conversations that happen naturally because of the transformation they see in you, Jesus' whisper reaches through your life to touch their hearts too. Your healing becomes a doorway for their healing. Your rest becomes an invitation for them to find rest too. This is how Jesus' whisper spreads from one weary soul to another. Not through arguments or pressure or religious programs, but through the simple, powerful witness of a life that's been genuinely transformed by his love. But maybe as you're thinking about all of this, you're feeling a mixture of hope and hesitation. Part of you wants to believe that this kind of healing is possible for you, but another part is afraid to hope too much in case you're disappointed again. That hesitation is understandable. If you've been hurt before, if you've had your hopes raised and then crushed, if you've tried to find healing in places that ultimately left you more wounded than before, of course you'd be cautious about opening your heart again. But here's what I want you to know about Jesus' whisper. It's not like those other sources of hope that ultimately disappointed you. It's not dependent on human perfection or ideal circumstances or your ability to maintain certain feelings or behaviors. Jesus' whisper comes from someone who knows exactly what it's like to be human, to face disappointment and betrayal and physical exhaustion and emotional pain. He's not speaking to you from a place of detached divinity, offering solutions he's never had to use himself. He's speaking to you from the place of having walked through every kind of suffering this world can offer and having emerged victorious on the other side. His whisper carries the authority of someone who has personally conquered death, defeated fear, and proven that love really is stronger than anything that tries to destroy it. When he whispers healing to your tired soul, he's not making promises he can't keep or offering hope he can't deliver. He's extending to you the same power that raised him from the dead, the same love that held him to the cross for your sake, the same grace that covers every mistake you've ever made or ever will make. This isn't wishful thinking or positive psychology or religious platitudes. This is reality. This is the truth about who you are, why you were created, and what's available to you right now, in this moment, exactly as you are. You don't have to clean up your life first. You don't have to understand everything about faith or God or spirituality. You don't have to feel ready or worthy or spiritual enough. You just have to be willing to listen, to be honest about your tiredness, to admit that you need help you can't give yourself. And in that willingness, in that honesty, in that moment of surrender, Jesus' whisper breaks through every barrier, every wound, every fear that's been keeping you from the rest your soul was created to experience. His whisper is calling to you right now, cutting through whatever noise is surrounding your life, speaking directly to the deepest places of your heart with words of healing and hope and unconditional love. Can you hear it? Can you sense, even in the smallest way, that gentle voice saying your name with tenderness, calling you home to rest, inviting you to lay down the burdens you were never meant to carry? That whisper is real. That invitation is genuine. That love is waiting for you to receive it. All you have to do is say yes. But saying yes isn't a one-time decision that fixes everything forever. It's more like learning a new language, developing a new skill, creating a new habit that transforms how you navigate each day. Some days you'll hear Jesus' whisper clearly and feel wrapped in his peace like a warm blanket on a cold night. Other days the noise of life will be so loud that his voice feels distant, and you'll wonder if you imagined that sense of his presence. That's normal. That's human. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong or that God has stopped caring about you. It just means you need to keep coming back to that place of listening, that posture of openness, that willingness to receive what he wants to give you. Think of it like tuning a radio. Sometimes the signal comes in crystal clear and you can hear every word of the song. Sometimes there's static and you have to adjust the antenna or move to a different location to pick up the frequency. But the radio station is always broadcasting, always sending out its signal, whether you're tuned in perfectly or struggling to find the right frequency. Jesus' whisper is like that constant signal, always available, always reaching out to your heart with exactly what you need to hear. Your job isn't to make the signal stronger or to earn the right to receive it. Your job is simply to keep adjusting your inner antenna, to keep positioning your heart to receive what's already being transmitted to you with infinite love. And here's something beautiful about this process of learning to hear his whisper more clearly. It doesn't require you to become super spiritual or to spend hours in prayer every day or to understand complex theology. Some of the people who hear Jesus' voice most clearly are the ones who approach him with the simple honesty of a child. Maybe you start by just talking to him like you would talk to a friend who really cares about you. Tell him about your day, your worries, your hopes, your confusion. Share the things that are keeping you up at night and the moments that bring you unexpected joy. Be honest about your doubts, your anger, your disappointment with how things have turned out. He's not shocked by your humanity. He's not offended by your questions or your struggles or your imperfect faith. He actually loves your honesty because it creates the kind of authentic relationship where real healing can happen. Pretending you're fine when you're falling apart doesn't impress God. Being real about your brokenness opens the door for his wholeness to flow into your life. Maybe you start by setting aside just 5 minutes each morning before you check your phone or dive into your daily responsibilities. Use those 5 minutes to simply be still, to breathe deeply, to remind yourself that you're not alone in whatever you're facing today. Ask Jesus to speak to your heart, to show you how he sees your situation, to give you his perspective on the challenges ahead. You might not hear an audible voice or have a dramatic spiritual experience, but you might notice a shift in your attitude, a sense of peace about a decision you need to make, a sudden insight about how to handle a difficult relationship. You might find yourself humming a song that speaks to exactly what you're going through, or you might remember a Bible verse you learned years ago that suddenly feels relevant to your current situation. These aren't coincidences. This is how Jesus often whispers to hearts that are learning to listen. He uses the ordinary moments, the everyday experiences, the simple interactions to communicate his love and guidance and healing presence. Maybe you start paying attention to the things that bring you unexpected peace. Is it watching the sunrise with your coffee? Is it taking a walk in nature where you can breathe freely for the first time all day? Is it listening to music that stirs something deep in your soul? Is it having a conversation with someone who really sees you and accepts you as you are? Those moments of peace, those glimpses of beauty, those connections that make you feel less alone in the world. They're all whispers from Jesus, reminders that you're loved, evidence that there's more to life than just surviving from one crisis to the next. The more you notice these whispers, the more you'll begin to recognize his voice in other areas of your life. You'll start to distinguish between the thoughts that come from anxiety or fear or past wounds and the thoughts that come from his heart of love for you. You'll begin to sense when he's guiding you towards something that will bring healing, and when he's warning you away from something that will drain your soul. But here's what I want you to understand about this journey of learning to hear Jesus' whisper. It's not a performance that you can succeed at or fail at. It's a relationship that grows deeper over time, like any friendship that develops through consistent interaction and mutual trust. Some days you'll feel like you're making great progress, hearing his voice clearly and responding with faith and obedience. Other days you'll feel like you're starting over, struggling to hear anything above the noise of your own worries and distractions. Both experiences are part of the process. Both are opportunities for growth and deeper connection. Jesus isn't keeping score of how well you're doing at hearing his voice. He's not frustrated with you when you miss his whispers or misinterpret his guidance. He's infinitely patient, infinitely kind, infinitely committed to the process of healing your soul and teaching you to live from rest instead of exhaustion. He knows that learning to receive his healing is like learning to walk after being bedridden for a long time. Your spiritual muscles need time to strengthen. Your emotional reflexes need time to change. Your mental patterns need time to be rewired by his truth, instead of the lies you've been believing about yourself and your situation. And during that process of healing and growth, he doesn't expect you to be perfect. He doesn't require you to have unwavering faith or complete understanding before he'll continue whispering to your heart. He meets you exactly where you are, speaks to you in ways you can understand, and provides exactly the amount of light you need for the next step of your journey. You know what's remarkable about Jesus' approach to healing tired souls? He never rushes the process. He never demands that you heal faster or trust deeper or understand more quickly than you're able to. He works at the pace your heart can handle, revealing truth gradually so you're not overwhelmed, providing strength incrementally so you don't become dependent on spiritual highs instead of on him. This is so different from how the world approaches healing and growth. The world wants quick fixes, instant results, dramatic transformations that happen overnight. But Jesus knows that the deepest healing happens slowly, gently, in the hidden places of your heart, where no one else can see the work he's doing. Maybe today, his whisper is simply reminding you that you're not alone, that he sees your struggle and he cares about your pain. Maybe tomorrow, his whisper will give you courage to take one small step toward healing, to have one difficult conversation, to make one healthy choice that you've been avoiding. Maybe next week, his whisper will reveal a lie you've been believing about yourself and replace it with truth that sets you free. Maybe next month, his whisper will open a door you didn't even know you wanted to walk through, or close a door that's been draining your energy and stealing your joy. The timeline isn't what matters. What matters is that you stay connected to the one who's doing the healing work in your life. What matters is that you keep listening for his voice, keep positioning your heart to receive his love, keep trusting that he's working even when you can't see or feel evidence of change. And here's something that might surprise you about this process. As you learn to receive Jesus' whisper of healing for your own tired soul, you'll naturally begin to recognize when others around you are struggling with that same soul-deep exhaustion. You'll start to see past the masks people wear, past the brave faces they put on, to the weariness they're carrying underneath. Maybe it's your co-worker who always seems to have it together, but who you notice staying late at the office every night, avoiding going home to face whatever's waiting there. Maybe it's your neighbor who keeps their yard perfect and their house spotless, but who you sense is trying to control their environment because everything else in their life feels chaotic. Maybe it's your friend who's always busy, always involved in multiple projects and activities, but who you realize might be running from the silence where their own thoughts and fears would catch up with them. Maybe it's your family member who seems strong and capable, but who you begin to understand is carrying burdens they were never meant to bear alone. When you've experienced Jesus' whisper of healing in your own life, when you know what it feels like to have your soul tiredness touched by his love, you develop a kind of spiritual radar for recognizing that same need in others. Not because you become judgmental or superior, but because you become compassionate. You see their exhaustion through the lens of your own healing. And in those moments of recognition, Jesus' whisper through your life becomes his whisper to their hearts. Maybe it's as simple as asking how they're really doing and then actually listening to their answer instead of rushing to give advice or fix their problems. Maybe it's offering practical help when you see someone overwhelmed instead of just saying you'll pray for them. Maybe it's sharing your own story of finding rest in Jesus, not in a preachy way, but in the natural way that comes from genuine gratitude for what he's done in your life. Maybe it's just being a peaceful presence in their chaos, a calm voice in their storm, a reminder that there's another way to live besides constant striving and stress. You don't have to have all the answers or be perfectly healed yourself to become a conduit of Jesus' healing whisper to others. You just have to be willing to let your own experience of his love overflow into the lives of people around you who desperately need to know that they're not alone in their tiredness. This is how Jesus' whisper spreads from one heart to another, from one tired soul to another. Through ordinary people who've experienced his extraordinary love, who've learned to find rest in his presence, who've discovered that they don't have to carry the weight of the world on their own shoulders. But as beautiful as it is to become a source of healing for others, don't let that become another burden that exhausts you. Don't turn helping others into another form of performance, another way to try to earn your worth or prove that you're valuable. Remember that you can only give from the overflow of what you're receiving, not from your own depleted reserves. This is why learning to hear Jesus' whisper for yourself is so crucial. Not just so you can help others, though that's a wonderful byproduct, but so you can live from a place of abundance instead of scarcity, rest instead of exhaustion, love instead of fear. When you're regularly receiving from Jesus, when his whisper is consistently filling your soul with his peace and strength and hope, you have something real to offer others. Not advice or solutions or religious formulas, but the authentic witness of a life that's being transformed by divine love. And that witness is more powerful than any sermon, more compelling than any argument, more convincing than any theological explanation. When people see genuine peace in the midst of chaos, real joy in the face of difficulty, authentic love in response to hurt, they want to know where that comes from. They want to know if it's possible for them too. Your healed life becomes an invitation for their healing. Your rested soul becomes a doorway for their rest. Your experience of Jesus' whisper becomes their introduction to his voice of love, calling out to them in their own tiredness and struggle. But remember, you're not responsible for their response. You're not responsible for making them hear Jesus' whisper or convincing them to receive his healing. You're simply responsible for staying connected to him yourself, for continuing to listen to his voice, for allowing his love to transform you from the inside out. Some people will be drawn to the peace they see in you and will want to know more about the source of your strength. Others might be threatened by your healing because it challenges their own commitment to staying stuck in patterns that are familiar, even if they're destructive. Some will celebrate your growth, while others might try to pull you back into old ways of relating that keep everyone equally exhausted and overwhelmed. All of these responses are normal. All of them are part of what happens when you start living differently, when you begin to prioritize your soul's health over other people's expectations, when you choose to listen to Jesus' whisper instead of the voices that have been driving your life toward burnout. Don't let other people's reactions determine whether you continue on this path of healing. Don't let their discomfort with your peace rob you of the rest you found in Jesus' love. Don't let their inability to hear his whisper make you question whether what you're experiencing is real. Trust what you know to be true in your own heart. Trust the changes you see in your own life. Trust the peace that comes when you listen to his voice, the strength that flows when you rest in his presence, the hope that rises when you remember his promises to you. Your healing journey is between you and Jesus. Others are welcome to join you, to learn from your experience, to find their own path to his healing whisper, but their choices don't determine the validity of your own encounter with his love. Stay close to him. Keep listening for his voice. Continue to position your heart to receive his healing, his rest, his peace. Let his whisper be the constant soundtrack of your soul, reminding you of who you are, whose you are, and what's available to you in every moment of every day. And as you do, as you learn to live from that place of connection with him, you'll discover that the tiredness that once defined your life no longer has the power to defeat you. You'll find that you can face difficult seasons without being crushed by them, handle stressful situations without being overwhelmed by them, love difficult people without being drained by them. Not because you've become superhuman, but because you've learned to draw from a superhuman source of strength, not because your circumstances have become perfect, but because you've found someone who's present with you in imperfect circumstances. Not because you no longer experience weariness, but because you know where to go when weariness comes. This is what it means to let Jesus' gentle whisper heal your tired soul. This is what it looks like to find rest that goes deeper than sleep, peace that transcends circumstances, strength that doesn't depend on your own reserves. His whisper is calling to you right now, in this moment, wherever you are, whatever you're facing. It's cutting through the noise of your worries and fears and overwhelming responsibilities to speak directly to your heart with words of love and healing and hope. You are seen. You are known. You are loved completely, just as you are, with all your struggles and questions and imperfections. You don't have to earn this love or prove that you deserve it. You just have to receive it, believe it, and let it do its transforming work in your life. His gentle whisper is the answer to your soul's deepest cry for rest. It's the healing you've been searching for in all the wrong places. It's the peace that your heart has been longing for, even when you didn't know how to name what you needed. Listen for it. Wait for it. Trust it when it comes. Let it heal the tiredness that has been weighing you down and transform you into the person you were always meant to be. Someone who lives from rest instead of exhaustion, from love instead of fear, from hope instead of despair. Your tired soul doesn't have to stay tired. Your weary heart doesn't have to remain weary. Jesus' gentle whisper is calling you home to the rest you were created to experience, the peace you were designed to carry, the strength you were meant to draw from his infinite love. Can you hear him calling your name? Can you sense his invitation to come and find the rest your soul has been desperately seeking? He's waiting for you. His whisper is ready to heal your tired soul, to give you rest, to transform your weariness into strength and your despair into hope. All you have to do is listen. All you have to do is receive. All you have to do is let his gentle whisper heal your soul.